Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful.
I call it a self-trust build. It's like you're creating evidence that you're going to be an upstander for yourself. So you're not going to be a bystander and just be reactive to all the stuff coming at you. So they have self-worth, they have that agency to try things. So it does make a huge difference. And also it helps with decision making, because decision making can be really challenging, and questioning the what ifs, especially for teens. It's hard for all of us. I struggle with that too. But when they start to make more powerful decisions and they get some clarity around their process for how they do that, and then they have their own back, it creates more power to create more clarity for themselves moving forward, and it creates more action. And so like pinging back and forth between indulging in procrastination or overwhelm or fear, just take the action, and that's when it's going to come up, all the self-doubt and everything. But you just got to keep practicing taking action.
What would it be like for kids and teens and adults, for that matter, to love themselves as they are and also take empowering action to improve their health? That's what today's guest, Dr. Karla Lester, board-certified pediatrician and life coach, is working tirelessly to achieve. Her journey to this purpose was a winding one and an ever-changing one. Starting out as a pediatrician and doing clinical work, then nonprofit work, and now as the TikTok doctor and coach at IME, getting the message out and working with kids, teens, and their parents on overcoming shame, developing self-compassion as a superpower, and all the way teaching sustainable, healthy eating habits and overcoming insulin resistance. You'll want to listen today about how she has her own lived experience with weight gain and being a human, making mistakes, developing her own self-compassion, and working to help others do the same. It's a message of humanity, a hard look at media and our own complicity in the childhood obesity epidemic, and an educational look at weight gain, insulin resistance, and shame. And mostly, it's a message of hope. Looking forward to seeing what you think of today's episode with Dr. Karla Lester. Well, hey everybody, this is Melissa with The Fully Mindful, and I'm super excited for this guest tonight. I have Dr. Karla Lester. She's a board-certified pediatrician and professionally certified life coach, kind of a killer combination there. She's been called by other physicians and leaders in the field a passionate advocate for children's health with a longstanding commitment to addressing the childhood obesity epidemic at the community, state, and national levels. And indeed, through her coaching, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, she is inspiring teens to revolutionize their health and chase their dreams through positivity and the power of choice. And it's very exciting. You're going to see why we have her on the podcast. She is lit, I think is the word. My teen will tell me that at some point, whether or not that's even a word. So welcome, Dr. Karla Lester.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It would be great for folks to learn a little bit about how you got into the field of teen health with advocacy around healthy lifestyle versus diet culture.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, it's a long story. I'll try to summarize. So I've been a community pediatrician for a long time, and I've kind of done everything that you can do as a pediatrician. I've been a hospitalist. I've been an owner as a general pediatrician in a large private practice. And so as I started seeing more patients, even young kids come in being diagnosed with prediabetes, fatty liver disease, I started thinking, what are we going to do about this? Because, we used to term type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes, even when I was in residency. And so I started noticing in my patients first the trend. And then I started a clinic in my practice called Healthy Living Clinic. And so families could come for 8 weeks, and we did a couple runs of it, had a whole multidisciplinary team. And I thought, well, this is great, but it's not really enough. And it's not where the kids live and they're learning and they're playing. It needs to be a community public health effort. So then in 2007, the American Academy of Pediatrics and 14 other organizations came out with what are called the expert committee recommendations. And it's like, okay, here's the, bullet point recommendations for a community pediatrician like me on how we should be assessing, preventing, and treating, and then also advocating on childhood obesity. So I took a look at those and I thought, well, I can do some of these here in clinic. And I'm already doing some, but I need to figure out how to do this in the community, and started looking around at other models like out of Chicago and in Omaha, which is close to where I am, in Lincoln. Had a great model called Activate Omaha Kids at the time. So started having lots of discussions, thinking about other nonprofits started by physicians in the community, and just started listening and learning. And it just felt like a calling to me to start a nonprofit. So I started a nonprofit and left my practice, which is a really hard decision for me. It's still emotional when I think about leaving my full practice of patients I love so much, and so many I took care of since they were babies, to start Teach a Kid to Fish, my nonprofit. So my vision was really, that metaphor of, yeah, sure, I'm one pediatrician with a passion for this, but we really need to empower the youth voice around it to make the change. And the vision was creating community solutions for children's health. So I literally started it from scratch. I left my ownership and my practice. And my husband and I have the resources to do it. But my kids were 6, 4, and then 20 months when I started Teach a Kid to Fish. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I had a donated office space, and I would just meet with one person who would say, meet with these 10 people. And then those 10 people, I'd meet with them, and they'd said, meet with these 10 people. And I did so many cold calls, and it's amazing, how partnerships work through trust. And it just built this beautiful community collaborative that my biggest success, I always thought, was people would say, oh, I know about Teach a Kid to Fish. How are you involved in it, to me? And it would just be like they owned it, And so we had so many great family programs and community programs. And it was so challenging to get the funding for the programs. And it was just like constant, chase. And so I left, my practice being, a pediatrician with these skills and everything I'd trained for, to take on like 5 different new jobs that I had no clue how to do. But ended up being,
kind of slow down for just a second. What was the main vision of Teach a Kid to Fish?
It really was that community solutions for children's health. Like it was that the community would come together around it. We worked in healthcare, in school systems, in early childhood, and then community. And it ended up, my office was at the health department here, and we have a university here. So I was able to work with Dr. Tim Nelson, who now has NIH grants. Some of it because of the work that we did with Teach a Kid to Fish, because we did community programs that showed this is feasible in this community to run this pilot program. So now we can scale it with NIH funding. So it was just amazing. I look back on all the moments with families that we were able to provide so many families with so many wellness wins. Like they just had a blast, like cooking as a family, moving as a family. We had energy events where they would go on these long walks. We do training. It was just a blast. So,
yeah. And so how long did you lead the nonprofit?
The American Academy of Pediatrics had recommended like the staged approach to treatment for kids who really needed the help. And as you see, like this issue with severe obesity getting worse, I was bound and determined when I started my nonprofit that I wasn't going to do a clinic. But, I kept getting calls from the school nurses like, this kid really needs a place and they can't go to Omaha, which is like 60 miles away. So I was like, okay, fine. That was something that took me 3 years literally to pull this multidisciplinary weight management program together, to get the funding, to pull all the pieces together and work with the health systems that don't want to collaborate. So it was very political, lots of arm twisting. And I learned how to say, here's your give, here's your get, And finally, Children's Hospital in Omaha, they see patients in Lincoln and have specialty clinics. So they expanded it. And then I was the medical director for that. And then what happened was in 2016, with the Affordable Care Act, population health kind of exploded. So we started looking at what is improving quality of care, decreasing costs, value-based care, and looking at adverse childhood experiences and more social determinants of health and health disparities. So then I was at the American Academy of Pediatrics National Conference and Exhibit, and Nadine Burke-Harris, who's a Surgeon General of California, she's kind of the flag waver, the ringleader on pediatric ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and chronic toxic stress and its effects on children's health. And she was the keynote. And I just had the vision and I brought it back to Nebraska. And I said, we had been in talks to start a population health center that my nonprofit became a part of. That was like every child needs, sound, safe environment, sound relationships, and healthy eating. And it was awesome. So I started that in 2016 with Children's, dissolved my nonprofit, moved my team, all the programs and grants and everything to launch the Center for the Child and Community. And then ran that and directed that and grew that over the next 3.5 years. And then I ended up resigning from that position in September 2019 and decided to move forward and get back to my original vision that I had with Teach a Kid to Fish, and became a life coach, took my obesity medicine boards and invested. My husband's like, here we go again. This time I turned Teach a Kid to Fish into LLC and created IME Community for teens.
Yeah. And for the listeners, that's IME Community. I love I'm assuming you had the play on words there, right?
Yeah, that was so cool because I work with a branding agency, and the head of it, he really got me. And so when they heard my vision, the whole team met with me. I said, I want full self-acceptance now, full love and acceptance for themselves, and accept you want to make some changes. They don't have to be, there's no duality, there's no cognitive dissonance. We can be body positive and reach our health goals. We don't have to be one or the other. And so it came to him imagining a teen looking in the mirror and saying, I am me. And then, I talk about the power of a community. And so it's like the power of the individual backed by the support of a community.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And, that vision is really incredible. And I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into it, especially because culturally, there seems to be that dichotomy, right? There are people who are staunch supporters of body positivity, which is a wonderful thing. Absolutely. And then there are people who are stuck and mired in this diet culture, and somehow there's a lot of shame, and we'll talk about that. But like there are these two dichotomies, right? Either it's a health issue and we're talking about losing weight, or it's a body positivity issue. And like you said, they don't have to be disparate. They can be totally aligned. And I think you're the first person I've seen, and maybe there are others, and I'm sure there are, but you're the first person I've really seen marry those two and say, you can have both. You can have self-acceptance and total self-love and also want to make some changes for your health.
Exactly. You can have whatever you want. We are not movements. We are individuals here leading our own creative, magical lives. I wrote an article called Let's Meet in the Middle when I started IME Community. And that's really my whole philosophy. It's published on my website. This pinging back and forth is really pinging back and forth between a restrictive mindset, which is diet culture, that we need to be harsh and punishing, all or nothing, on again, off again. That doesn't work. And that always leads to, whether it's immediately or over years sometimes, which is what happened to me, because I haven't even talked about that. I went through my own weight loss journey.
Yes.
And that's when I found out, oh my gosh, we're doing this wrong. All this calorie reduction and restriction, calories in, calories out, that we've been prescribing in my clinic, which wasn't working, was causing more harm. But so it's either restriction, all or nothing diet culture, calories in, calories out. Every bit of weight gain is due to your lack of willpower and, some sort of moral failing. It's ridiculous. Or this, like, I should be happy with whatever my body size is. And unfortunately, neither of those resonate. Like, over here is kind of the self-hate harshness that I find whenever anybody wants to take action on any goal. I don't care if it's changing what you're eating or stop procrastinating or getting better grades or being more organized, whatever it is. If you have that restrictive, perfectionistic, negative self-talk, attachment, you don't want to take action on anything, because you're just going to weaponize every little teeny bit of failure as you're a failure, versus being over here in this, I'm all for body positivity for sure, but we don't want to use it against ourselves either. It's like, it's okay to also not be happy about your weight or be disappointed, or, whatever you're feeling is your human feeling and emotion. And you can allow that, and also be body positive. So I think, it's like, let's just talk about what's the actual issue is the epidemic of insulin resistance, and how we can take some simple action steps and create habits to address the actual health issues instead of just always pinging back and forth about different movements. But it's attachment to beliefs. Over here with diet culture, it's a real fear of letting that go, because that rigid restriction, we think, is what really keeps us where we are.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating, because there are some real health risks to some. It depends, I guess, on the type of weight gain and the amount of weight gain. So the body positivity at all costs is not really realistic for that reason too, right? Because there are some real health risks to certain types of weight issues for teens, for kids and teens and adults, of course, too. And so we can't ignore those. And yet, yes, of course, be body positive, but also the way to address the real health issues is not to be restrictive, not to impose shame, and, like you said, weaponize every little thing that you don't do perfectly, because that's just self-defeating and worse.
It'll lead to binging, or, that restrictive mindset is a cliff. I was talking to one of my colleagues who is a physician and a coach who treats patients who have eating disorders. And I mean, it's all the same what we do. And, we're like, the patients who have actual health issues, it is a challenge for us to kind of thread that needle, keep them moving forward with positive action, but not, because diet culture is so profound and so strong, and that attachment to that perfectionistic, like Dr. Brene Brown says about, like, it's an addictive upset. I mean, I have it in my brain and I know when I'm mobilizing it, it feels really draining and it happens right away, but it is like a cliff that you fall off of. That's why I really like focusing on metabolic health. I talk about weight gain as a symptom, and you can be metabolically healthy at any size. Obviously, body diversity is a fact. We want to celebrate that. We don't want to have just one size that may be unattainable or unhealthy for us, especially a child or a teen to try to get to. But if we focus on just health habits, atomic habits, and we talk about, let's get the information. Not enough pediatricians are getting the data for their patients, unfortunately, which makes it super hard for parents to make the discussion with their teens anything other than weight. If you have significant health concerns about your teens, say maybe you're worried about binge eating or eating habits or emotional eating or and coping with food, or you have a family history of maybe type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease or whatever, and you're truly worried about their health, but the doctor doesn't order the labs, the doctor doesn't have the discussion about health, and then it's a real disservice to the patient, but also makes it really hard for the parents.
Right, because the only data point is the weight, and that's not the issue, right? But that's the only data point that the parents have. And I've heard many parents say that they've had a lot of difficulty getting the doctor to order the labs, or they don't know what labs to ask for. That's the doctor's job. So they just rely on the doctor. Well, the doctor didn't say anything, so, we don't have to do anything, but I'm concerned. And it's all this confusion when it seems like it would be really simple to order some labs to get the actual data. What is going on with this kid?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's just helpful information. Let's be curious, compassionate scientists. Yeah. I mean, you may be able to turn those labs around pretty quickly. And that may be motivating for a teen and for a parent. And let's offer them more than just a bullet point recommendation. It's like, okay, we need to work on maybe the cholesterol. Well, how do we do that? Okay, let's work on, like, where do you want to start? Do you want to start at breakfast? What are you having for breakfast? It's just start small, and it doesn't have to be this grueling deprivation, all or nothing.
Right. And I think that's really important. I mean, getting the information can seem kind of scary, I would imagine, to some. And having had my own health situations, it can be a little scary, but then it's also a relief because you have the information, which empowers you to have a plan for how to address that, rather than just on some sort of raft in this massive sea of waves of I don't know. And so I would think also for teens, I mean, they haven't been on the planet that long, and they have high intensity hormones and a lot of things to be worried about and afraid of. And so not giving them the information seems to me not only a disservice, it's really just unkind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote an article after a TikTok study that I saw that was done by the University of Vermont. And they showed that teens and young adults go to influencers on TikTok, and they looked at top videos that had, like, in total like 1 billion views or something. There's not a doctor on any of those videos. There is not a RD, a registered dietitian, on any of those videos. And they're all very focused on weight loss. Many of them are young, thin influencers with big platforms, and that's where they're getting their information. So we gotta, as pediatricians, step up and give them the information and not be afraid to have conversations. And I've been critical of my colleagues in the American Academy of Pediatrics clinical practice guidelines that they just came out for treatment. And they're very aggressive on weight loss medications. We just barely have these phase 3 trials out of these once weekly injections. And I wrote an article about that too. I'll be prescribing them, I'm sure, in my practice, but we have to have considerations for use. And they're very aggressive with weight loss medications and also surgeries.
Yeah, those are really extreme. These medications are not inconsequential. And while they work pretty well, as I understand it, what's the message that is the concern that you have, that I think I probably share, but I would like you to articulate, when these doctors are freely prescribing these very serious medications?
Well, I will say that within the pediatrician moms group on Facebook, which is a big group of pediatricians, most people are really upset by the recommendations and by the guidelines, and believe that they're too focused on weight loss, even on really young kids, and that could be really harmful. One message that I really hate that I think gets sent to kids is, you're broken, your body's broken. Here's this quick singular fix for it. And I've had patients who've had bariatric surgery and they've done okay. I mean, it's always a real long haul and a slog, and I don't know how they're doing now years later.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot that goes into it. And I do have concerns because I think it's a missed opportunity for us to do better with these guidelines, because we were so focused on body mass index and BMI, and that doesn't fit for everybody. And it's not a motivator. I've used BMI forever. I've done so much with BMI in my career, but as far as an individual patient, it isn't a motivating number, especially for a teen. It's at best neutral. So while we haven't been really focused on insulin resistance or reversing diabetes or really helping teens navigate this world of ultra processed food that they're inundated with and marketed to constantly, and help them navigate social media and some of the screen time, process addictions, or this instant gratification dopamine society, and then this perfectionism. Those are the things I think we really need to be focusing on helping them with.
Yeah, it seems to me a far more systemic approach that is what you're offering up, rather than this quick fix. Here's this injection, which it may very well work in the short term in terms of allowing the weight loss. But the message that it can have, doesn't always necessarily, but it can have, is, it seems to me, disempowering. Like you said, you're broken, and not only are you broken, you're not able to fix you. I have to give you something. And I'm not going to empower you with the tools to even give it a try, to get healthier and make healthier choices in your life. It's very disempowering, is the way that I view it. And I guess I wanted to talk a little bit more about BMI. Why is that not necessarily a motivating number for teens? And what is kind of wrong with that, with just relying on that number?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with The Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today.
Well, I mean, with our society, there's so much weight stigma. And so I think going to the clinics, we have these issues with teens. I mean, first, attendance, adhering, attrition rates are really high. They drop off. I think they are just shame triggers, just places to activate shame. Change is about coaching and helping people transform. Health transformation is transformational. It requires a vision. It requires you to stay with it, because we're not used to setting a goal for ourselves. We don't even know what health means in this country. And healthcare has really not helped us with it. We need positive emotion activation. And BMI is compliance, and it automatically is a negative emotion activator. So I just work a lot with trying to get clients and patients to have agency, to have their own autonomy, especially with teens. I mean, they don't mess around and they let me know, which I love, which is why I like working with them. So that's really important. Like BMI is just like, they don't care. I wrote an article about teens don't care about BMI. Why should we? And I talked about one of my patients, Marcus, who would come to me and he never cared about his BMI. And I would go over it every time, like a broken record. And he'd just be like, and he had some comorbidities and he just didn't care. It didn't motivate him in any way.
Right. So what do you think tends to motivate the teens? If it's not BMI or even the weight number on the scale, which just becomes oppressive and not a motivating factor for change, what are they motivated by?
Well, there's a couple things. I think whenever we want to make a change, one thing is like, what is this a problem for you? And also, what do you want? So what are you excited about? And can you envision it, which sometimes they cannot? And what is why is this a problem for you? Sometimes like the parent will have a problem with it and be worried about it, but the teen's like, I don't care. So that's going to be a problem for you, parent, because they don't care, but it helps to really have open conversations, help the teen come to their own conclusions. And also if it isn't really affecting their life, like say, maybe they're doing a lot of buffering with sugary foods. I mean, that is kind of the number one issue that I get. And they'll be like, I don't imagine that I could ever eat sugar in moderation, or is that possible? And so that's causing problems for them because maybe their clothes aren't fitting that they really like, or they gained a lot of weight during the pandemic that they're upset about. And so that is actually a problem that they want to work on.
Right. So you make it relevant to the specific teen rather than just relying on the basic message that has been put out there by the American Pediatric, is it Society? American Pediatric
American Academy of Pediatrics.
American Academy of Pediatrics.
Well, one thing I did, I went to a training with the Body Positive Institute, which was really cool. And there's like 5 different components to it. This one is to reclaim health, redefine health. So I always do that. Like, what does health mean to you? And so teens will say the physical and the mental, emotional health are all interconnected. You can't have one without the other. They want small changes to count. They want it to be small changes to count and be enough. And then like to just count their wins. So instead of like, oh, I did good this day, and then it's all erased the next day, we only count our wins.
I love that. I mean, our culture is steeped in thin privilege. It always has been. Well, maybe not always, but it has been for a very long time. I remember being as young as I think I was in 5th grade and being very worried about going to PE, and they were going to take my weight. And indeed they did. And I got, some comments or maybe even made fun of. And from that point on, I mean, I was just obsessed with what I was doing wrong. I never had that reframe of what are my wins. And honestly, I probably didn't need any of that because I just didn't need to be worried about weight at all. It was not a health issue for me. But because that was the message that was out there, it was very harmful. And I ended up developing disordered eating patterns, and that ultimately ended up in, like you said, when you do really restrictive eating, it can lead to binge eating, and in my case purging, very unhealthy habits. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about that too, is this perpetuation in our culture. And I know you talk a lot about that on your social media, TikTok and Instagram, about the message, the thin privilege message. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, with the Body Positive Institute, I did a training, not on just the 5 components of body positivity, but we were talking about social justice and eating disorders. And I volunteered to get coached on like a moment. We were talking about processing emotions, and I was saying, oh, I just had this instance where I was really struggling to allow disappointment. And I didn't realize I resist disappointment so much in my life. And I thought, oh, I'm coming to all this, these amazing conclusions. And then I looked back and I said, I think, one of the reasons I struggle is in my work, I look back on being disappointed a lot in my patients. Here we go, the BMI's up again, internalized bias and blaming, right? But I had an instance with one of my patients in my healthy living clinic who came, and the family had gone on a vacation, and he gained like 15 pounds, and then I had like to report my outcomes to my partners. I was in front of the group. This is vulnerable for me to say this as a physician, I'm writing about it. I said, I know you're disappointed, like at the wrap up in front of all the families. I know you're disappointed, and I'm disappointed too. And I just let it slip. And the mom just let me have it, which she should have, Yeah. Like she was like, that's a terrible thing for a doctor to say. And so then I was thinking, okay, I've shared this vulnerability here in this workshop. And then the coach, she said, can you forgive yourself for contributing to the suffering and the harm for your patient by you saying that? And then I was like, okay, I acknowledge that forgiveness means that I can't change the past. And then I was like, a little while later, I was like, hey, can we go back to that? I'd done all this great work. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have caused some harm.
Yeah.
And it just was so emotional for me. And I think we all need to acknowledge the harm. I mean, we had good intentions, or we're operating under this, pursuit of thin privilege, this fat phobia, this internalized bias, this fear that we project onto our patients or our kids, or that we operate from. And I mean that it's not really about health, it's about pursuit of thin privilege and the social capital of thinness, which is when I learned that. And then I started seeing the almond mom TikToks. That's when I was like, oh, wait.
Hey, everybody, if you like this conversation, make sure to rate the show in Apple or Spotify or wherever you are listening so that others can find it and enjoy it too. And if you like the show and want to keep hearing great conversations with really interesting people about how they found their purpose, please donate to the show. Go to thefullymindful.com to donate today.
Yeah, so I'm sure that not all the listeners here are going to have any idea what an almond mom is. So tell us what an almond mom is and how that impacted you.
Well, the term became viral on TikTok recently because of Yolanda Hadid. She's a mom of Gigi and Bella, who are supermodels, and she was a supermodel herself, and she was on Real Housewives. And so she was pushing her restrictive eating practices on her supermodel daughters, especially Gigi. And there was one moment when Yolanda was literally in a post-op like recovery bed, and Gigi called her from some runway show, and she said, oh my gosh, I'm so weak, I've only eaten like half an almond today. And she said, go ahead and eat 2 almonds and just chew them really, really slowly. And so they started calling her an almond mom. And then people were making so many viral videos about their almond moms, and, a moment on the lips, forever on the hips. Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. So I did a video that went viral, and it was like, an almond mom is a mom who's fat phobic. She has internalized bias. She projects that fear onto her child and the restrictive eating practices. She subsumes them. And then I had actually coached some moms who came to me. I'm here for the kid, But the mom's like, I just keep thinking my daughter will be better if she was a size 0. It makes me want to cry. But I mean, the kid is like body confident, healthy, like normal size, and it just made me really sad. I was like, oh my gosh, that's what this is. And so that video went viral. And then I just started getting reach outs from NBC News, today.com. I was on NBC News. I just had an interview by Fox News in Houston the other day on almond moms. And there was an article on BuzzFeed News about almond moms. And it's dads too. But I mean, we all have to have grace and compassion for ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't have to be stuck in it. But if we perpetuate that kind of genetic lineage of disordered eating, it's going to cause harm.
Well, yeah. And I mean, in some ways, I'm not going to say I don't fault the parent for being that way, but it is that internalized bias that has been perpetuated by this culture for years upon years upon years, by media, by people we now call influencers, where this is the way that you're supposed to be. So I'm sure some of those parents are honestly thinking, I'm trying to do the best for my child, because they realize the world in which that child lives does privilege thin.
Exactly.
And so they only want the best for their child, and they don't realize that they're actually harming their child with these messages. They're actually, as you said, contributing to the suffering of their own child and other children by doing this.
It's true.
Yeah. And so I guess, what's the first step for these almond moms and dads to stop doing this, stop perpetuating the suffering of their own children?
I think the main thing is to just have a lot of grace and compassion for ourselves. Like, this is a really messed up culture. It's okay. I mean, look at me. I just turned 54 and I'm a doctor who's been doing this. I've just been deconstructing this myself. I have to sometimes be like, it's okay, Karla, like, you've been doing this work forever. They're not going to get it just like that. 'Cause sometimes I'll be like, how would you define health? Let's cancel diet culture and let's move on. And they're like, what? They don't even know what it means, and then it's super disappointing because they think, oh my gosh, she's going to help me get my kid to have thin privilege. And then here she's talking about actual health. Dang it. No, but the next thing is, if we want our kids to have healthy habits and self-confidence, okay, they need us as parents to help them navigate and thread this needle in this ultra processed food world and with all the social media that they're seeing that we didn't have when we were growing up. So they really need our help there. And so I say, where are you activated and triggered as a parent? And so we really work on like some of that, just kind of soften up, having compassion for yourself. You're not there to fix and solve. You don't control your child's weight. You don't cause it. And so when they're eating, stay out of it, stay in your lane when your kid's eating. So a lot of them will give a look. And since I coach parents and I coach teens, I've had kids say, oh, I can't do that because my dad will give me a look, or that my parents will look at each other, and awesome parents, and I mean, we have good intentions. It's just habits. So try to stay out of their lane when they're eating and try to stay out of judging around their body and what they're wearing. Like, had a dad who's like, the clothes they wear, and his daughter is one of the bigger of the friends. And I said, listen, you're gonna have to let it go, because if she doesn't care what she's wearing and she loves it and she's having fun with her friends, then it's not a problem for you. So I mean, with the body and the food judging, it's just kind of try to just create a pause, and then that'll kind of help you get out of it, because that causes continued harm. So it's really working on the relational health between the parent and then the teen, because we don't want it to be compliance, like you're telling them what to do. We want them to come to their own conclusions, have the autonomy, and work together.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you talked about your own health journey, and I talked a little bit about mine. Can you talk a little bit about how this has played out in your own health journey, these principles and these practices?
Yeah. And first I wanted to acknowledge, thank you for sharing that, because I know that even though you share it, I know how hard that is to share that. I just wrote an article about parenting with chronic depression as a physician mom. I've had so many people reach out to me, and it's probably resonated more with other parents than any article I've written. So, I always grew up super thin privilege for sure. Skinniest kid in my class. And I'm a kid of the 80s. So, it just became something I could control in my life. My parents were divorced. It was a tough childhood. And so I think I was just like a lot of other girls, where that was just something that we were fixated on, and just never dreamed I'd have a weight problem. And then, just got busy with life and med school and residency and having children and all that stuff. And then in September 2017, I had happened upon Katrina Ubel. She's a coach, she's a physician, and she coaches busy women physicians on weight loss. And I started listening to her podcast, and I really loved it and learned about the thought work. And I just became overweight over time. I had a really bad Diet Coke addiction, like an addiction. I'm not demonizing Diet Coke, but for me, it drove a ton of cravings. I can't go off of it. I can't have a balance with it, is what I mean. So that was a part of it. And then just lots of stress. And so I was like, I'm not going to go on a diet, because I know I can restrict myself, and I'm not doing that. And so I decided I'll sign up for this thought work. And so we read the obesity code, and it's, a low carbohydrate lifestyle, which has been great for me. And the coaching was just so powerful to do the thought work. And so that was September 2017, and took me 11 months or so. And then that just was so powerful. And it was interesting because at Children's, where I was, And with the clinic and the population health center, the more I tried to integrate that work, the more I was peripheralized. And healthcare systems are just interested in the bariatric surgeries for teens. So yeah, so it's been a really cool journey, and just adding in all the other self-compassion work where I've been able to add in self-love superpower and atomic habits and all the other training. It's just been really cool.
Yeah, it seems like you walk your talk. You've been through it, you have lived experience around it, you had to examine your thoughts, your feelings, what you really wanted. And so you've done the journey. And I mean, that has incredible credibility. And I'm not surprised that your most recent article about being a physician with depression has reached so many. And I think it's really important that we destigmatize these, because when we destigmatize these by talking about them, and it takes incredible courage to talk about them because of the stigma, but when we do, it inevitably reaches other people and gives them permission to get help or talk about it, right? It's that power of identification. Oh yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Right. That's why the Me Too movement went viral, right? Someone had the courage to say something, and then more people had the courage, and then more people and more people and more people, and then change came.
Yeah.
And so I'm just such a big believer in doing that, even though sometimes it's really, really hard.
It's hard to know when to share it, when to hold
Yeah.
the space for it. And my husband's like, I didn't even know you wrote that article, Karla. And I wrote it in July. And then I decided, I'm going to publish 20 articles by the end of 2022. And so I had 2 more to do, and that one's in the queue. And one of the articles I wrote was about my parent coaching that I got when I resigned from my job. That was pretty traumatic. My mother had just passed away, and then my oldest daughter had just gone to college. But I tell you what, I started working with a coach that one of my physician colleagues had been working with, and it was great, but it was like 100% around my parenting. And I mean, talking about, walking it and living it is working on that relational health, learning, reading The Awakened Family, boundaries, doing mental rehearsal on just those minuscule interactions, trying to give up being right and the power and the control over constant battles, especially with like my middle daughter, who's an awesome kid. And blaming her, which was ridiculous. And when I'm the adult and I'm the mom, and expecting her to change. And my coach would be like, when you change, your kids change. And that's so true. And that's why for the almond moms or anybody who's stuck in diet culture, it's like, you really don't have to be like focused on, what do I need to do here and change up every single thing we're eating and work out and be this perfect role model for fitness. No, you got to be a role model for self-compassion.
Right.
And my kids have seen me fail big time and rebuild and just keep going. But for me, that has been the most powerful work of my life and most important, because in the end, that's what I care about is my kids.
Yeah, and it's so important to build that muscle of self-compassion. And I really do believe that's what it is. And so many of us are taught to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and basically whip yourself into shape, whatever shape means, getting your act together, being a perfect parent, being in perfect health, being the perfect employee, being the perfect doctor, being the perfect whatever, right? We're just supposed to just somehow like magically decide that this is what we are. And so then when we fail, it's catastrophic, or can be, if we don't have these tools for self-compassion. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up, developing that muscle of self-compassion, not only for yourself, but it's something that you model for your children, and also that you work with your clients on, is developing that I think you called it a superpower.
Yeah,
right?
That's my whole thing. Self-love superpower is like self-kindness is the key to your health goals. So we think we have to be harsh on ourselves and grueling. And that's cortisol release. And it's hormonal. So insulin and cortisol, they work together. It's going to make your insulin resistance worse. I don't think people talk about that enough for teens. We made so many small things so high stakes for them. And then social media makes it worse. And it's like, try not just sweat the small stuff so much, but we've got this maladaptive stress going on in their bodies that's just really unhealthy. So yeah, the more it can recognize in their body how it comes up when they're being really hard on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really powerful.
Yeah, I'm aware of some studies that have looked at self-compassion because there is this perception that it makes people weak. It actually has the opposite because, like you said, that stress, that chronic stress actually can put people in that fight, flight, or freeze. Or, I say fight, flight, freeze, or F it, that puts them in that.
Yeah.
And it's that doesn't help motivate anyone. Whereas the studies have shown that self-compassion, actually finding a way to be nice to yourself and to understand yourself and offer yourself some kindness, actually tends to motivate people more.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen that in your practice, is that the more these kids are developing that self-compassion, that self-love, the more they not only feel empowered, the more positive changes that they're making in their lives, and the more they just feel good.
Yeah. And I call it a self-trust build. It's like you're creating evidence that you're going to be an upstander for yourself. So you're not going to be a bystander and just be reactive to all the stuff coming at you. So they have self-worth, they have that agency to try things. So it does make a huge difference. And also it helps with decision making, because decision making can be really challenging, and questioning the what ifs, especially for teens. It's hard for all of us. I struggle with that too. But when they start to make more powerful decisions and they get some clarity around their process for how they do that, and then they have their own back, it creates more power to create more clarity for themselves moving forward. And it creates more action. It's like trying to get the teens, they're just like, instead of like pinging back and forth between indulging in procrastination or overwhelm or fear, just take the action, and that's when it's going to come up, all the self-doubt and everything. But you just got to keep practicing taking action.
Right. Courage comes from actually having done the thing or being engaged in the thing, not as a conditioned precedent before you do the thing, right? That's how we build confidence. That's how we build courage, is by actually taking the action. And that is no small feat for anyone. But when we're talking about kids who are struggling with their health due in part to obesity or weight gain or weight issues, and there's been so much shame. And the one thing that I think I really love about what you're doing, in addition to everything we've just talked about, is really educating them on the fact that it might not even be their fault. There's this thing called insulin resistance, and you talked a little bit about it before, but can you say a little bit more about that and why it's so important for them to know this so they can get to the self-love and self-empowerment and all the other skills that you're helping them with?
I'm glad you brought that up. So diet culture teaches us, and even healthcare is stuck in this energy imbalance model or theory of weight gain that became just popularized in the 80s. And it is calories in, calories out. Like our body is a simple machine, like that weight gain is just due to eating more calories than we burn off with exercise. And it's not that simple. And it became popularized at the same time that these dietary guidelines came out in 1977, where everything went low fat, high carbohydrate, our food system changed. And then it's just been a perfect storm of poor health for teens. So what's happened is we've missed the epidemic of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is an adaptation of the body's exposure to consistent carbohydrate, like refined sugar, ultra processed foods, and the high fructose corn syrup that's been added to everything. And so our bodies were not meant to be exposed to carbohydrates and at the level that they're exposed to them, that we consume them in this country, and also to the frequency. So we were told to eat meals a day. And so what happened when they went low fat is then they added in all the sweeteners. And so the ultra processed food addiction model has been super successful with its marketing, neuromarketing tactics, and the trifecta of refined sugar and trans fats and salt together that actually create addictive pathways. And that's one of the reasons why insulin resistance runs in families, but we wouldn't have this epidemic of insulin resistance and issues like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and then obesity. So when you have insulin and then you have chronic stress from cortisol, those two hormones working together are what causes the hunger, craving pathways, because our bodies just keep us here at the status quo. So all of our hunger hormones and appetite and our cravings are our body and our brain working together to like say eat to keep us here, okay, at the weight we are now. So insulin resistance is an adaptation, and the problem is chronically, like persistently high levels of insulin. Insulin is a powerful fat storage hormone.
It can cause weight gain.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, even when people are not eating all that much, they can still keep putting on the weight because of the insulin resistance.
Yeah. If you have insulin resistance for a long time, and it depends on certain family history and genetics too, if you're predisposed, it becomes its own kind of cycle within your body because it's the chronic hyperinsulinemia. Our bodies are meant to have insulin be released when we eat food. And then our blood sugar goes up, and the pancreas releases insulin, locks into the receptor on the cell membrane, opens it up. That's a channel so that the blood sugar molecules go in the cells to be used to create ATP, our body's energy source. And so insulin keep our blood sugar like at this kind of really narrow range. And then when the blood sugar goes down, then the pancreas doesn't kick it out anymore. But if it's always released, then it stores anything we're not using for fuel as fat. It's a fat store, and it keeps it on lockdown. It keeps your fat stores on lockdown.
So, and it can be really dangerous health-wise, right? So that's why it's so important that you are talking with your clients about this, not only from a knowledge point of view, but also to cut away at this belief that everything is their fault, which is what they've been told, right? That's the message that they've gotten. And so you can't even talk about self-empowerment and self-love and self-compassion until there's this basic understanding of this isn't your fault. This is society. This is how we eat here in this country, the messages we've been having for decades and still have. You're fighting against something that is super ingrained in this culture still in healthcare. And so once we understand that, like, let's dispel the fact that it's all you. That's the problem here, or that you're broken. Let's get to the reality of the situation and, okay, what do you want? I love that you give the kids agency. Like, how do you define health? What do you want the outcome to be?
And make it simple, like it's totally reversible. That's why I like working with teens too. Because I've seen it reverse pretty quickly, and it doesn't have to be super dramatic changes. So that's pretty empowering. And I like how you put it though, to really help people help them understand, this is a metabolic health issue, and eating can be medicine, finding a way to eat in a balanced way that is not restrictive or depriving, but where you're getting enough of the, quality macros in. So you're getting enough protein. Most teens don't get enough protein. You're getting enough healthy fats. Usually they don't think about eating healthy fats, and fat's been demonized. So adding that in whenever they eat. And then protein's going to stabilize the blood sugar. Healthy fats are going to create satiety and fullness and satisfaction with eating. And then transitioning to eating more complex carbs instead of trying to limit our added sugar intake, and just be mindful of how much sugar intake we have, because it's everywhere, especially for teens, all throughout the day. And they don't have sometimes an awareness of how much sugar I'm actually intaking.
We could just keep talking forever. I wanted to get into this with you, and so we'll have to have a part 2 to talk about the relationship with metabolic health and mental health and those sorts of things. I know we've previously talked a little bit about Chris Palmer's work and in brain energy and linking mental health disorders with diet and nutrition. And so we'll have a part 2, I guess is what I'm telling listeners, if you'll come back to talk more about kind of geek out a little bit on that. And I'm so, grateful that we got to geek out on the self-love and your own journey. And I guess to that, since we're sort of rounding this out, I mean, now that you know all that you've been able to use that self-compassion on yourself, right? And I'm sure it's a lifelong journey. I know it is for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what would you tell that younger self who's in the throes of this practice and is getting messages from the American Academy of Pediatrics? What would you tell her if you could go back and tell her something?
Oh, wow. This is making me emotional, but I'm so glad that you asked this. This is a big question. I would say it's okay to not know an answer. You don't have the answers, Karla.
Yeah.
You're not there to fix and solve. You're not there. There's nothing broken. You can show up and just love your patients. Everyone's on their individual journey. You're going to create community with compassionate connection. That's all you have to do. And just, be there to learn, which is what I get to do on TikTok, is learn. And I've learned so much more than I ever learned in clinic. But I would say, I'm not there to fix and solve because, my patients are beautiful. They're completely unbroken.
God, I love that. That made me emotional. I could have used that message many times in my life as well. And, I think it's such a beautiful message just in general for how we are on the planet and how we are with ourselves. So thank you for that. And let us know, let the listeners know, and I'll definitely put it in the show notes for those who like to read that stuff. But for those of us who just like to listen to things, how can people find you?
Well, you can go to my website, imecommunity.com, and find me there. You can get in on a 30-minute coaching call with me at drkarlamd.com. And I'm on TikTok all the time. That's where you're going to really find me. So you can go to @IME Community or look for Dr. Karla, it's with a K, and follow me there and follow along. I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karla Lester. It's been such a pleasure and a privilege to have you here and to talk about this important topic. And I appreciate your vulnerability and your candor, and I hope you'll come back.
I will, for sure. Thank you so much. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, if you like this conversation and are looking to align your work and life with your purpose or uncover your purpose in the first place, work with me. I coach people ready to uncover and appreciate their worth, make an impact, and find meaning and purpose in the work they do, whether that's personal or professional work. Get your mind right and make your plan for impact and coach with me. Connect with me for 15 or 20 at the Calendly link in the show notes below and talk about coaching with me. Hey everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.